Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. So guys, we go back to the intricate interplays between Malam Buhari, Abba Kyari and Yemi Osinbajo. So we go back to that space because that space continues to recur in the news and is current in the news at the moment. So with that guys, I bring you this: how Abba Kyari manipulated Buhari to sack Osinbajo from Ruga projects. So that's the headline: how Abba Kyari manipulated Buhari to sack Osinbajo from Ruga projects. So now let's see now what palace intrigue is going on this time around. When Vice President Yemi Osinbajo wrote to President Muhammadu Buhari seeking approval for funds to continue his role in resolving the deadly farmer-herder conflict earlier this year, he did so with little awareness that a middleman would interrupt it, moderate it, and ultimately discard his role altogether. Yet, that was exactly what transpired after Mr. Osinbajo pushed a memo to Mr. Buhari earlier this year that was subsequently undermined by Abba Kyari, the president's chief of staff. After successfully rubbishing Mr. Osinbajo's request to Mr. Buhari, Mr. Kyari went on to instigate the president to sack Mr. Osinbajo from his role as the head of a committee that was raised to resolve the perennial violence between farmers and herdsmen. This is based on official documents and interviews with people familiar with the tussle for influence at the presidential villa. The exclusive documents gleaned provide a rare glimpse into the humiliation Mr. Osinbajo is facing at a time speculations are rife nationwide about how poorly the vice president is being treated by the president's senior aides and allies. A request made. The documents showed Mr. Osinbajo sought the president's approval for 3 proposals relating to the development of the National Livestock Transformation Plan, NLTP. Mr. Osinbajo had earlier been mandated by the president to lead the initiative with other governors in the National Economic Council (NEC). The NLTP was proposed when the Buhari administration came under pressure to find a lasting solution to the incessant herdsmen violence that killed nearly 4,000 people between 2015 and 2018. The plan included programs of rehabilitation of displaced persons in states ravaged by the farmer herders violence and development of ranches for nomadic herders in any willing state of the federation. After months of preliminary consultation and inputs from affected states, an agreement was reached by states to form a substantive committee that would oversee implementation of the compromise, make NLTP the coordinating institution of all outstanding issues bordering on herdsmen crisis, and coordinate funding for the transformation efforts. In an April 12, 2019 memo to the president, the vice president detailed the agreement to the president and requested approval. He mentioned that 35 billion naira had been earmarked for the livestock transformation policy, out of which 12 billion had already been released for Ruga projects, and that includes construction of ranches for Fulani herders along designated grazing routes. The entire 35 billion was pulled from the ecological funds of the federal and state governments. The 12 billion naira was earmarked for emergency Ruga projects in Niger, Zamfara, Kebbi, Kogi, Plateau, Taraba, Nasarawa, Benue, Kaduna, Katsina, and Adamawa states. The states were designated frontline states affected by the farmer-herder crisis. Subsequently, since 12 billion had been earmarked for immediate use, Mr. Osinbajo pleaded with Mr. Buhari to release 22 billion for the long-time implementation of the project, including providing succor for people displaced by the violence in Benue, Plateau, and other states. Mr. Osinbajo also stated in the memo reference number SH/VP/ NLTP/02/1 that the 22 billion naira would be deposited in a dedicated account with the Central Bank of Nigeria and only withdrawn for specific purposes as may be approved by the member states in the proposed steering committee. But rather than forwarding the Vice President's memo to the President for approval, Mr. Kyari held it for more than a month, eventually submitting it to Mr. President on May 16. But before he submitted it, the Chief of Staff reworked the memo to include his own observation and recommendations to the President. Mr. Kyari told the President that the request by Mr. Osinbajo should be rejected because the 12 billion naira voted for the Ruga projects had not been fully utilized. Given that the President had approved the 12 billion naira for intervention for the Ruga model through the National Food Security Council (NFSC), we respectfully recommend that we first evaluate the development impact of this particular project before releasing further amounts for the NLPT, Mr. Kyari wrote. This is key, especially as major security operations are ongoing in some of these locations. On Mr. Osinbajo's request for an inclusive steering committee to be inaugurated to drive the livestock transformation policy, Mr. Kyari knocked it as a duplication of efforts. This plan may not be an effective strategy due to the overriding importance of the farmer/herder issues in the National Food Security Council, which Mr. President is the chairman, he said. The Chief of Staff then proceeded to recommend that Mr. Buhari should scrap the NLTP, an initiative by the state governors and the Vice President as a representative of the administration. To avoid duplication of efforts, we respectfully recommend with emphasis that Mr. President retains oversight of the farmer-herder issue under the NFSC, Mr. Kyari said, adding that the council includes all heads of security and intelligence agencies as well as representatives of governors from the 6 geopolitical zones. Finally, Mr. Kyari proposed the establishment of a National Livestock and Fisheries Commission that would be responsible for formulating, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating all projects relating to ranching, fisheries, and other related issues. On the 24th of May, the President approved Mr. Kyari's request, subsequently discarding Mr. Osinbajo's request. Your recommendations above endorsed, Mr. President said when he signed the memo with reference to PRES/65-1/COS/2/996. In approving Mr. Kyari's recommendation over Mr. Osinbajo's, even without consulting with his deputy, Mr. Buhari appeared to have more respect for his aides. Presidency sources informed that there was no basis for the president's action, which was just one of the several acts of insubordination against the vice president. Mr. Osinbajo addressed the memo directly to the president, and it is unclear why the chief of staff had to sit on it and eventually rubbishing the content before presenting it to the president. It is not for the chief of staff to advise the president on a memo that came directly from the vice president, an official informed. The vice president issued the memo based on a policy he had been personally supervising, the official said. So there is no basis, especially in writing, that it should be subjected to the advice of a subordinate. The official said it was not uncommon for a president to call his chief of staff or other aides to seek verbal advice on an action he wanted to take over a request from the vice president, but he would then have to first revert to the vice president for further briefing and suggestions on areas that needed improvement. Another official informs Mr. Kyari took the step to retain power to himself by proxy. If the approval sought by Mr. Osinbajo had been granted, matters around the farmer herder crisis would have been joint federal-state concerns and issues would have been vigorously debated before funding is earmarked. He notes that if the president is in charge, he will be the one issuing orders over the livestock matters in the president's name, the source informed. That would include spending monies without any questions or accountability, unlike what would have happened if the steering committee had been approved. Mr. Buhari abruptly suspended the Ruga project in July following an outcry from Nigerians that the establishment of Ruga settlements should be voluntary amongst states and not imposed by the federal government through the takeover of state lands. Presidential spokespersons Femi Adesina and Garba Shehu did not return multiple requests for comment on this story. Correspondents, however, obtained the memos as Mr. Buhari was embarking on a private 2-week visit to the United Kingdom. The president did not hand over power to Mr. Osinbajo. Instead, he has been asking his aides to bring crucial documents to him for assent in London. The Nigerian law requires that the president hand over power if he would be away from duty for 21 days. On Monday, Mr. Kyari flew to London to submit a new bill on offshore oil fields to the president for assent. The action drew sparked response amongst Nigerians who said it was embarrassing that the presidency would make a public show of such a controversial action. One of the acute dangers of the executive presidency in the third world is that it gives too much power to whoever the president chooses, said political analyst Shola Olubanjo. If the president gives you attention, you become powerful, he said. Even if you are a cook or a cleaner, you will be controlling the vice president and the ministers without anyone questioning you. Mr. Olubanjo said under an ideal situation, especially in advanced societies, the vice president would resign his position immediately for what Mr. Kyari did. It was a clear case of insubordination, and it also showed that the vice president does not have the president's ears, Mr. Olubanjo said. But the seat of power is a jungle here, and those in power are only looking to perpetuate themselves in office, even under very humiliating circumstances. So now this is now the latest narrative in the life and times of this Yemi Osinbajo character. I coined a phrase in one of my earlier videos, the Bobriskification of Yemi Osinbajo. So Yemi Osinbajo is now being Bobriskified. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The only purpose now that Yemi Osinbajo serves in this regime is to go somewhere and look sharp and look pretty and deliver a speech. That is really all they trust him to do, and the speech that he's going to deliver, of course, has to be vetted by Abba Kyari. There's absolutely no question about that. So now look at this now level of humiliation that this guy is having to endure in a seat that he was elected to, apparently by the Nigerian people. Even if it's by rigging, at least they are claiming that they won an election, and this was the running mate of the person who claims that he won an election. So obviously then Yemi Osinbajo was party to this winning of the election that they alleged. We also saw him handing out 10,000 naira to market women. We also saw what that guy did with his helicopter falling every minute and all of what that guy went through to return these people into power. We also saw what he did, and by way of reward now, he's now having to do Rankadede to Abba Kyari. This is now how they have rewarded him. So the Bobriskification of Yemi Osinbajo, now they are putting him in a dress and asking him to go around looking pretty, delivering speeches, and that is effectively all the purpose that he now serves in this regime. Come tell me all about it in the comment section, what your thoughts are. The level of humiliation that this guy is having to endure, is it past the pain barrier, and why has he not resigned yet? Or indeed, should he resign? Come let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But before you do that, click on the red subscribe button so it turns gray. The bell button notifies you every time I drop a new video. Then come tell me what you are making of the way Yemi Osinbajo is being Bobriskified in the comment section. So I'll leave you here. Join me in the comment section, but here I say peace.